What's up, Fargo? I am Arbor Diggs, and I'm so sad that I'm not with you all in person, but everything was out of our situation. I don't know if Tammy has told you all yet, but my heart longs to be with you all, but instead God wanted it this way. So we're gonna hang out via YouTube and have a great time, and then hopefully you all have a beautiful night together there in Fargo as I am stuck in a rainy Tennessee. My husband and I were arguing about what is greater, a cat or a dog. And clearly we picked dog because they're greater. Then we started to argue about what is greater, a Chick-fil-A sandwich or Chick-fil-A nuggets. And I was like, the nuggets. And he was like, no, the sandwich. And I was like, you're literally insane. And then we went on this game, bringing up two different things and arguing which is greater. And it's a fun little game that I was going to play with you all, so you all can play it with your huddles. You name two different options and name which one is greater. But when it comes to God, the beautiful thing is there is no argument of if anything or anyone or anything that anyone does is greater than who God is, what God does, and what God says about you and I. You're going to hear about how God has greater potential and promises and so much more. But I want to take us to a story in Scripture where we see a guy who was actually very depressed find out how God is greater in two different ways. And my job today and my goal for this talk is to show you how those two ways that were written way back then in the Bible actually can help us today and be so relatable. So as you turn to 1 Kings 19, it's in your yellow Bible on page 197, I'm going to give you a quick backstory. We're about to read a guy named Elijah. And Elijah was a prophet. That means he was used by God for God. And what God did with Elijah was he would usually show up and tell him through an angel or something else what to do, and Elijah would go do it. Where we pick up in our story, he just did something, and it made a girl who is crazy, like an ex-girlfriend type, psychotic. It made her so mad that she actually threatened to kill Elijah, and Elijah is so scared. So we're going to pick up in 1 Kings 19. If you're not there yet, I hope you get there soon. 1 Kings 19, we're going to go to verse 3. It says, "Then Elijah became afraid and immediately ran for his life." He is terrified. I mean, I would be too. Psychotic ex-girlfriend type energy, I am running. When he came to Beersheba that belonged to Judah, he left his servant there, the person that was working alongside him. But he went on a day's journey into the wilderness. He sat down under a broom tree and prayed that he might die. He said, "I have had enough." Then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. So what just happened? That's crazy. So what we just saw is Elijah faced a situation where he was so scared. He faced a situation of death. So there was fear, there was anxiety, there was a sense of unknown. And he was like, I need to escape from this issue in my life. And he escaped to isolation. It says that he ran and left the person that was working with him and went by himself. He escaped to the woods, right, where no one else is. So in this time of fear and unknown and scary, he wanted an escape. But he escaped to the wilderness and to isolation. And we see that did nothing except make him even more depressed. And he even prayed that God would take his life. There was no joy in that escape. And you see, Elijah knew God well, right? It says that he was used by God for God. So he should have known, my God is a comforter, my God is a friend, my God is a rescuer, my God provides, and he should have escaped to God. But what did he do? He escaped to the wilderness, to isolation. He escaped to everything else but God. And I told you it would be relatable to us because you and I both do this. I do it so many times. I did it last night when I could not get on any plane to Fargo. I escaped to sadness and my own thoughts instead of to God's faithfulness and thanking him, maybe you're saving me from something. So what do you escape to? When times in your life don't go well, when something happens, when something is scary, when you're fearful, when you're in the unknown, when you're at school or on the golf course or at home and something happens, where do you escape to? What do you escape to? What do you watch to escape from? What do you listen to escape? You see, we all do these things. We choose an escape other than God, and it leaves us just like Elijah, empty and alone and unsatisfied and stuck in our same situation, because nothing but God can escape us from what's happening. So what do you escape to? We're about to keep reading, but I have to ask, what do you escape to? And you truly think about it. Let's keep reading. It says in verse 5, suddenly an angel touched him. The angel told him, get up and eat. Get up and eat. That's my type of angel. Man, I love food. Get up and eat. Then he looked, and there at his head was a loaf of bread baked over hot stones. If you've ever had hot bread, that's like, ooh, so good. And a jug of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. Then the angel of the Lord returned for a second time and touched him. And he said, get up and eat, or the journey will be too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Then on the strength, that word's important, on the strength from that food, he walked 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. He entered a cave there and spent the night. Stay with me, we have a few more verses. Suddenly, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? And Elijah goes on to describe how sad he is. He says, I am alone, I am left. They are all looking for me to take my life. In verse 11, this is our last verse we're going to read right now. Then he said, go out and stand on the mountain in the Lord's presence. Go out and stand on the mountain in the Lord's presence. See, when Elijah got scared, we said that he escaped to everything else but God. All right, and honestly, if someone chose something else other than me when they should have chosen me, I would be a little angry. I don't know about you. I'd be a little like, I'm not going to help you anymore. You chose something else. But does God do that? No. He goes after Elijah, even though Elijah went after something else. You see, God didn't leave him there. God wanted to show Elijah that God was the escape Elijah needed, not isolation. And I think he's using Elijah to show us today that he is the escape we need no matter what we're going through. His love, his presence, his comfort still is the greater escape to our problems. Not running and escaping to social media. Not running and escaping to boys, not running and escaping to popularity, not running and escaping to all these other places, not running and escaping to alcohol or dark places that can help us escape, but God is. You see, he shows up in Elijah's life by sending three things. The first two are circumstantial. He sends food and he sends sleep. And you're like, that's not God though. But you have to realize Elijah was exhausted to the point of death. He was running. And if you've ran a mile, maybe you're athletic. I don't like running. You're tired. He's been running for his life, like full on sprint. Psychotic girl is after him named Jezebel. He is running. And then he hasn't eaten, so he's so hungry. So God meets him using an angel with his circumstantial needs. He gives him food and he gives him water and sleep. And then the third one, he says, come be with me. He gives him his presence. You see, my favorite verse of all of this, it says that the Lord came to him after eating and drinking, and he said these words, what are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here? And God knew where he was. God knew where he was. He wasn't blind to it. So this what are you doing here, Elijah, isn't like, hey, what are you doing, dude? It's a what are you doing here, Elijah? And it's almost as if he's saying, you knew that I would be your escape. Why did you escape here? You knew that I could comfort you. What are you doing here? And you see, God asked me that same question when I was in college. I chose a lot of other things but God. You see, I was a little bit insecure, so I would choose boys to give me my worth and escape from my own thoughts. I would choose social media and all the likes and comments to make me feel better and escape my own insecurities. I would choose a lot of dark sides of college when it comes to parties and etc. to escape from the sadness I was feeling if I failed a test or if home life was bad. I would choose a lot of things. And in 2017, God showed up in my mess and said, what are you doing here, Arbor? He was like, you know me. You know that I've been with you since you got saved as a little kid. What are you doing here? Why have you chosen everything else? I am your greater escape. And he does that to Elijah. He shows up, he says, what are you doing here? But then he invites him into his presence. He says, what are you doing here, Elijah? And then he says, go out. Come be with me. Stand on the mountain in the Lord's presence, in my presence. And Elijah goes. And what I love is it says, if you look, it says that he went to Mount Horeb. Now you're like, that's a funny name. It's not like Mount Everest or another, I don't know if there's mountains in Fargo. There's a ton of mountains here, a ton of mountains that you can see on our map. But Mount Horeb actually is its second name. That's a first name. And it's Mount Sinai. And maybe a few little light bulbs just came through in your head because you're like, wait, I think I've heard of that name. It's actually where Moses goes up to get the 10 commandments. And what I love about that little fact, that Bible fact, is it because it shows that God is a God that makes a way and invites his people to hear his voice. God is a God who makes a way and invites his people to hear his voice. So we're going to keep reading. Because the second thing, besides God is a greater escape, is I want to show us that God has the greater voice. The greater voice. So let's keep reading. All right, it says, go out and stand on the mountain in the Lord's presence. Verse 11. At that moment, the Lord passed by. So he's up on the mountain right now. A great and mighty wind was tearing at the mountains and was shattering the cliffs before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire, there was a voice and a soft whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle, right, his little cloak, and he went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. So I imagine when I'm reading this, I don't know if you have seen it, but almost National Geographic, when it talks about the oceans, and if you watch it on Netflix, right, you're watching all of the scenes happen in nature on Netflix of a National Geographic special. Elijah's watching it before his eyes. He sees an earthquake and a thunderstorm and fire, but God isn't in any of those. It says God was in the soft whisper and the voice. You see, I think God does this for many reasons. I think he does this because at the time there were a lot of kings and gods claiming to be God. And so he showed them all, you're not the God because you can't control the weather. Right? You can't control thunderstorms and fire and oceans and everything. He said, I'm the only true God. So I think he does that and shows us that in this story. I think he also shows us that he is found greater in silence and in stillness, when every other volume is lowered and his is increased, when everything decreases and he increases. That is when we hear his voice the greatest. I'm going to give you a little analogy to help us better understand this concept. Before I was on my way to Fargo, I was actually driving my car a few weeks ago. I always listen to Spotify. It's on like max volume. I probably shouldn't have it. My ears are going to go out in the future, but I have it blaring. I also live in Tennessee, so I roll the windows down, so then I have the air like flying through my windows. There's a lot of noise happening. If you have ADD, which I do, you're a little overwhelmed sometimes. And at one point in driving a few weeks ago, my phone actually dies. And I was like, I'll just charge it, plug it up, and continue to play music. Well, I had forgotten my car charger, and I was like, tough. I'll just listen to the radio. There was literally no music on. It was awful. I don't know if your radio up there is great. Ours is so bad in East Tennessee. And so, I'm sorry, I also have allergies and I'm trying not to sneeze. Let's just be real here. We're all just trying to make it. So I'm driving and I was like, you know what? I guess I'll just sit in silence. I just have a few more minutes till I get to my house. And that's when I hear it. I hear the worst sound when I hit my brakes. And I was like, I'm gonna die. Like instantly panicked. And I was like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And so I pull over and I call my mechanic and I was like, dude, like, am I gonna die? Do I need to bring my car in right now? Like, I don't know anything about cars. And he was like, Arbor, chill. He was like, this has been happening for a while. It's just getting worse. And I was like, no, it's not. Like, I just heard it. Like, I would have heard it if it's been happening this whole time. Like, what are you saying? And he's like, breaks just don't immediately do that. He was like, it's been happening for several weeks now. And I was like, no shot. And then I realized, then it dawned on me after I sat there and was processing it. I was like, oh my gosh, I've been sitting in so much noise that I have never heard what's been right beneath my feet. I've been sitting in so much noise that I didn't hear what was right beneath my feet. You see, right now, in this moment, God's word is right here. We are reading it. It is open in front of us. But soon, the buzz of your iPhone, it'll ring. And you'll get a Snapchat notification or a BeReal notification or a group text or a TikTok audio trend's gonna come on, and you're gonna get sucked into the world of social media, and that sound dial is gonna increase a little bit. And then you're gonna see an ad talking about how to lose weight faster or fix your acne, and you're gonna start to think, do I need to lose weight? Am I skinny enough? Am I pretty enough? And you're gonna kind of get the sound dial of your insecurity turned up a little bit. And then you're gonna hear the voice of your parents. Did you do well on the golf course today? Did you finish your schoolwork? Or did you do your chores? And you're gonna hear the dial of perfection and trying to perform and be better for your parents and your coaches get turned up a little more. And then your friends text you, ask you if you got the latest rare beauty blush, and you're like, well, dang it, no, because I just spent all my money 2 weeks ago on the next new viral trending hit. And so you're wondering, how do I get enough money to fit in? Like, I just bought a new Stanley Cup and now there's like another one better. Like, what the heck? And the dial of trying to conform and fit in so you're accepted gets turned up a little bit. And if that wasn't enough noise, then you see all your friends hanging out without you, and you go to check your inbox and you're like, wait, I didn't get a text message. They didn't invite me. Am I not good enough for them? Do they not like me anymore? Am I too goody for them? Or you see your boyfriend start talking to someone else after y'all broke up, and you're like, wait, like, he told me that we're just taking a break, and here he is hanging out with another girl. Am I not pretty enough? Did he not want me? And we get consumed with all of this noise, and suddenly what's right beneath us, we can't hear. It doesn't mean it's not there. Just like my brakes, they were right under my feet. They were working. I was braking, but I couldn't hear it. And when the sound of this world and social media and boys and the news and politics and conformity and influence gets so turned up, you're not going to be able to hear God's word. You're not going to think he's there. You're not going to feel him. You're not going to hear him. You're not going to want to go to him and escape to him because he is so low in your life. You see, that's why I love what God does with Elijah. He shows him this whole storm, and he's like, all of this chaos, I'm not in it. All of this noise, you won't find me in it. You won't hear me in it. You won't see me in it. You won't feel me in it. But in the stillness, in the silence, when everything else is decreased, then I will be increased. You see, ladies, there are voices in your life that you're listening to. If you want to feel worthy and you're running to the voice of a boy, you won't find worthiness. If you want to feel accepted and you're escaping to society, you won't feel accepted, maybe for a little bit. If you want to hear how beautiful you are and how good you're doing because you're trying to do well for Jesus, and you escape to all these other places and listen to all these other places, you're going to feel miserable because Satan's going to attack you because it's not the voice of God. You see, I love that Elijah paints this picture for us. So I have to ask you, what voice is the loudest in your life? What voice are you going to other than the word itself? Because every other voice of the world is going to leave you empty. It may feel good for a while, but just like Elijah, you'll see it's all just noise, and it's not a voice. It's all just noise, and it's not a voice. So decrease the things in your life and put God first. It doesn't mean you can't get a social media. It doesn't mean you can't have a boyfriend. It doesn't mean you can go get the rare beauty blush. I have it on right now. It's beautiful. But if it takes the spot and it is increasing over God, you will not hear his voice, the loudest in your life. We're going to do one more point. This actually leads us into huddle 2. I want to show you how God has a greater plan, which is a greater promise. We're going to finish up super quick. I'm exactly at 20 minutes. I'm so happy. I talked to you all last year about how I go over on time a lot, so it helps having a camera in front of me to know exactly the time. I'm exactly at 20 minutes. Let's finish this up and let's finish this story. All right, verse 13, it says again, suddenly a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Elijah goes on to explain literally the same exact response, so we're not going to read it. We're going to finish with verse 15. It says, "Then the Lord said to him, go and return by the way you came to the wilderness of Damascus." And he gives him his instructions. I love it because I think this is a different question. What are you doing here, Elijah? The first one was like, dude, what are you doing here? Why didn't you escape to me? I think this one is, it's almost an awakening of like, what are you doing here when I told you the plan and the promise where you were? Right? He's like, I was using you there. What are you doing here? I still want to use you. My promises are still good. My plan for you is still good. Why aren't you there? What are you doing here? Why aren't you there working, being my prophet? And I love it because he says, go and return by the way you came. He said, go literally the exact way you came and go back and do my work. And I think tonight, ladies, I think he's asking us the same question. Some of us today have forgotten his plan, and his promises are so much greater than our plans. It's so ironic that I sat for 5 hours on an airplane questioning God's plan and wondering, why isn't my plan working? And then it hit me. It's not about my plan. And it's not promised that I'm going to make my next flight. And that's the thing. You may live such a great life. Y'all, high school, middle school, if you're in middle school, it's one of the most important, special, super fun times in your life. It really is. Don't get me wrong. You are performing great on the golf course. You're trying to get better. You love hanging out with friends. Maybe you're acing tests. Maybe you're in tutoring, but getting better, right? And it's great. But I want you to realize that there's a greater plan and a greater promise than just high school. There's a greater plan and a greater promise than just college. There's a greater plan and a greater promise than just catching a flight. There's a greater plan and greater promise than Elijah just sitting on a mountain. You see, God has promised his son Jesus. He says, if you believe in me, if you confess with your mouth that I am Lord, then my plan for you is eternity. My promise for you is eternity. Not a state championship, not to get viral on Instagram. All that's great, but that's not what he's promising. He's not promising you'll always catch your next flight. He's not promising, Elijah, you're going to have a safe journey. There may be more psychotic ex-girlfriend type girls about to come kill you. He said, but my promise is Jesus. My promise is eternity. So as I wrap up and as you're about to dive into greater promise, to see how God's promises are more than what we're experiencing now, I want to ask you a question. If you are a believer of Jesus, if you've accepted Jesus into your heart, I want to ask, are you escaping to him when things go wrong in your life? Or are you escaping to other things? And if you're escaping to him, I love that. Are you telling people how to escape to him though? When you see other people escape to other things, are you boldly proclaiming the name of Jesus? And then secondly, are you listening to other things, or are you listening to the voice of God? Is the voice of God greater in your life than everything else? If not, it's time to turn down the volume of the world and turn up the volume of the word. And lastly, can I ask you a question? If you're not a believer, if you haven't accepted Jesus into your heart personally, not your parents' faith, not FCA's faith, but your own faith, then can I ask, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? Not physically in the room, but with your life. Jesus has given you a free gift. If you haven't taken it, I ask why. It's a little scary. Maybe it's a little confusing of how a good God can save such a sinner like you, right? When you've messed up a lot of times and say some lies and do some things, or maybe you've done some big things. But can I ask, what are you doing here not taking the beautiful gift of grace and forgiveness and eternity, and remembering that God has promised a greater promise in his son Jesus? I'm going to ask my friend Emily Doden to come up and close. I hope she prays for you all. I hope you will take this time to think about how God is the greater escape, the greater voice, and has greater plans and promises for you than your everyday life. I love you, ladies. I hope y'all have such a beautiful time. And I'm so sad that I can't be with you, but I'm trusting the voice of God. I'm trusting His plan. I'm trusting His promises. And hopefully I see you all next year.